The night Kwon Jae-won threw his phone across the penthouse, nobody flinched. Not the two men standing near the elevator. Not Choi Dae-sung, his most trusted right hand, who had seen worse in 17 years of service. And not the small, unhurried woman moving to the dining room, clearing a dinner that had never been touched, who simply pressed herself against the wall and waited for the storm to pass, the way she always did. She was good at waiting. She had been doing it for 5 years. Kwon Jae-won stood at the center of his living room with his jaw locked and a bank notification burning on the shattered phone screen. 490 million won. Gone. Transferred out in 4 clean movements while he was sitting in a board meeting, using the personal access codes he had handed the woman he believed, for the first time in a long time, was different. Nah, Hee-jin had not just stolen from him. She had stolen from him with his own trust. With a passcode he gave like a gift, with a smile on her face while she told him she was not like the others. Find her, he said. His voice was ice and empty space. Dae-sung nodded once and was gone. Jae-won walked a window. 41 floors between him and the rest of Seoul. And still, somehow, she had gotten close enough. Not the money. The money was recoverable. What she had taken was something smaller and more irreplaceable. The thin, stubborn corner of him that had decided one more time to believe. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass and said nothing. In the dining room, Adiz Okafor finished stacking the plates, lifted them quietly, and carried them to the kitchen without a sound. She had heard everything. She heard the phone hit the wall. She heard the silence that followed, the kind that was somehow louder than noise. And she heard him at the window, making no sound at all, which was the worst thing of all. She set the plates in the sink, turned on the water, and told herself it was none of her business. She had been telling herself that for 5 years. Adiz had come to Seoul from Enugu on a household placement visa, assigned to the residence of a man whose name she had not fully understood until her second week. That was when she watched 3 of his associates leave his home office, walking like men who had forgotten how their legs worked. And she filed that information carefully, kept her eyes down, and did her work with the quiet efficiency that had always been her greatest skill. She was not supposed to feel anything beyond professional duty. That was the first rule of service, unspoken but absolute. She broke it quietly, without fanfare, sometime around the 4th month. She could not identify the exact moment. It was not dramatic. It was just him at 2 a.m. sitting at the kitchen island eating a meal she had left covered on the stove, eating it cold because he had not bothered to reheat it, mechanically, joylessly, like a man who had forgotten that food was meant to be something more than fuel. She had stood in the hallway's shadows and thought, very quietly, who takes care of you? It was a dangerous thought. She spent nearly 5 years keeping it locked behind every other thought she had. She was still washing the dishes when her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Miss Okafor. The voice was professional. Careful. Yes. This is Dr. Han from Asa Medical Center. You are listed as the emergency household contact for Mr. Kwon Jae-won. He was brought in 40 minutes ago. He collapsed at the residence. We need someone present. The plate in her hand hit the counter with a crack. She was out the door in 3 minutes. She found him on the 8th floor in a private ward, connected to a monitor, looking smaller than she had ever seen him look. Kwon Jae-won, who filled every room he walked into, who could end conversations with a single expression, lie against white hospital pillows with a line in his arm like an ordinary man. Her eyes burned. She pressed her lips together and walked in. His eyes were open. He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Surprised, maybe, that she had come, that she was already crying before she even reached his bedside. "Sir," she said, and her voice only broke slightly. "What happened?" He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down, Miss Okafor." She sat. Dr. Han came in, and the words he used were clinical and precise, and they landed on Adiz like stones dropped from a height. Acute myeloid leukemia. Aggressive. Treatment options existed, but the window was not generous. Without intervention, 18 months, perhaps, with full aggressive treatment. Some patients had reached 5 years. She watched Jae-won's face through all of it. He did not flinch. He absorbed it the way he absorbed everything, completely still, like a man who had already considered every outcome and was simply confirming his calculations. When the doctor left, the room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. "You knew," she said. "Before tonight. You already knew." A pause. 8 months. 8 months. He had been carrying this for 8 months while she made his meals and pressed his shirts and moved through his house like a ghost. And he had never. "Why didn't you tell anyone, sir?" He looked at the window. "Because telling people makes it real. And I had things to finish first." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He watched her do it with an expression she could not read. "I need to ask you something," he said. His voice changed, became the voice he used in business. Flat, measured, and I need you to hear it completely before you respond. She looked at him. "I need an heir," he said. "Someone to carry my name and inherit everything I have built. My attorneys require a named successor. My legacy does not end with me. I will not allow it." A pause. "I am proposing a contract marriage. You will be my wife legally. We will have a child. In exchange, I will provide for you and that child for the rest of your lives, financially, legally, and with the full protection of everything I own." The monitor beeped. Adiz stared at this man who had never once truly looked at her in 5 years, and felt something enormous and completely impossible move through her chest. "You are asking me," she said slowly, "to marry you contractually and have your child." "Yes." She stood. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door and stopped. "May I have time to think about it, sir?" Her voice was perfectly steady. She was very proud of that. "Take the weekend," he said. She walked out without turning around, because she did not want him to see her face. She said yes on Sunday. No speech. No negotiation. She simply appeared at the hospital at 8 in the morning, set a coffee from his usual place on the bedside table, because she knew his usual place, because she had always known these things, because that was a quiet tragedy of loving someone in silence for 5 years, and said, "I'll do it, sir. One condition." He looked at the coffee, then at her. "Go on. You do the full treatment. Everything Dr. Hahn recommended. You don't give up before you try." Something moved across his face, so quickly she almost missed it. Agreed. The contract was 14 pages. She read every word, signed her name on the last page, tried not to think about what her mother in Enugu would say if she knew. They were married 3 weeks later in a civil ceremony with 2 witnesses. Desung, who stood beside one with the expression of a man trying very hard not to have feelings, and a notary who had seen everything and felt nothing. Adiz wore a simple ivory dress she bought herself. She was not trying to look like a bride. This was not that kind of day. Jae-won wore a dark suit. He looked devastating and immovable and completely in control, exactly how he always looked, which she needed very desperately to stop noticing. The registrar asked him if he took her as his wife. He said yes without hesitation, without looking at her, in the same tone he used to confirm board meetings. The registrar asked her. She looked at the clean line of his jaw and said yes in a voice that did not shake. She was quietly proud of that, too. He did not kiss her. The civil ceremony did not require it. They signed the register and walked out into the gray Seoul afternoon as husband and wife, and she was still calling him sir, and he had not told her otherwise, and everything was exactly as it should be. The car ride back was silent. Then he said, "You should call me Jae-won." She turned to look at him. He was staring straight ahead. "Sir, we are married. Call me Jae-won." She faced forward again. "Yes, sir." He turned to look at her, something almost exasperated crossing his face. "Adiz, I will try," she said carefully. "It may take some time." Something that might possibly have been the beginning of amusement passed across his face. He looked away. She was given her own room, not the master suite, her own room, down the hall, which she was quietly grateful for. She moved her things in that afternoon, arranged her small collection of books on the shelf, hung the strip of Ankara fabric her mother had sent from Enugu, and sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. She was married to Kwon Jae-won. She was married to the man she had loved in secret for 5 years, and he had no idea, She pressed her hands to her face and stayed like that for a long moment. The first night was strange. They had dinner together. Her cooking, his kitchen, both of them at the dining table in a silence that was not quite comfortable, but not quite unbearable either. He read documents. She ate and looked at her own plate, and was very careful not to look at him too much. When she cleared the table and said good night, he looked up. "Good night," he said. Then, after a pause, it felt like a door opening a fraction. The food was good. She almost walked into the doorframe. "Thank you," she said, and went to her room and stood inside the closed door for a full minute. He was halfway down the hall when he stopped. She could hear it, his footsteps pausing outside her room. She held her breath. She waited. He did not knock. He did not come in. After a long moment, his footsteps continued to his own room. She sat on her bed, pressed a hand to her chest, and told herself very firmly that it meant nothing. In the weeks that followed, she learned what it meant to live with him rather than work for him. The difference was proximity. He was home more, on doctor's orders, 3 days minimum per week, which meant she could not avoid him. He appeared in the kitchen at odd hours. He stood at the window on calls. He worked at the dining table. And somehow, without either of them deciding it, she began to do her own quiet tasks in the same rooms. The treatment began. 3 days a week at Ace Medical. The first time he went alone, she found out from the driver. Something cold moved through her that she chose not to name. The second time, she was already in the car when he came down. He stopped at the door. "What are you doing?" "Coming with you, sir." She looked ahead through the windshield. He stood there for a moment. Then he got in. The door closed. The driver pulled out. He did not thank her, but he did not tell her to go home either. She sat beside him through every session after that, him in the treatment chair with his tablet, conducting business as though this were a boardroom, her in the chair beside her with a novel she barely read, watching the monitors, watching his face, watching for cracks he would never willingly show. On the 4th week, driving home, he said, "You don't have to keep coming. I know it's not in the contract. I know that as well." Silence. Then, quieter, like he was puzzling something out. "Why do you—" She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "Because no one should sit in that chair alone." He said nothing, but she felt the shift, small, like a lock turning somewhere. It started with the late nights. He had always kept strange hours. That was nothing new. But 3 weeks into their marriage, she noticed he was coming home later than even his usual late. 2 in the morning. 3. Sometimes she would fall asleep in the sitting room, telling herself she was just reading, and wake up to find the penthouse still empty. She said nothing the first time, the second time, the third, the fourth time. She waited. It was past 2 when she heard the elevator. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a cold cup of zobo she had made from hibiscus she kept in the pantry, and 5 hours of worry she had absolutely no right to feel. He walked in, stopped when he saw her, raised an eyebrow. "Miss Okafor." "It is a D's," she said quietly. "Or Mrs. Kwan, if you prefer. You gave me the name." Something shifted in his face. "You are awake." "I notice." She stood. "Sir, you are in treatment. You have medication with specific timing. I know what Dr. Hahn said." "Then you know that staying out until 3 in the morning is my business," he said, and his voice dropped into that tone, the one that ended conversations. "My life, my schedule, my choices, that is not what you agreed to." She looked at him. Every quiet, careful, reserved instinct she had built over 5 years told her to nod, say good night, and go to her room. She did not listen to a single one of them. "Of course it is my business." The words came out of her like something that had been held underwater too long. "I am your wife. You want me to give you a child, our child, but you will not even try to be alive long enough to be their father. Do you think the medication works when your body has no rest? Do you think any of this works if you are out until dawn every night like you have nothing worth coming home to?" The silence that followed was enormous. She became aware very suddenly of what she had just done, of how loud her voice had been. of the fact that she was standing in the kitchen of Kwon Jae-won's penthouse, pointing at him. She had just yelled at the most controlled man in Seoul. She closed her mouth. She straightened her back. She said very quietly, "Good night, sir," and walked to her room and shut the door behind her with a soft, control click. She stood inside the door and pressed both hands to her face. What had she just done? She spent the rest of the night oscillating between complete horror and something that felt embarrassingly like relief. In the morning, she came out of her room prepared for frost. She had worked for this man for 5 years. She knew what his anger looked like when it settled in. She walked into the kitchen. He was there, standing at the counter with coffee, dressed for the day, reading something on his phone. She moved to the far side of the island and reached for the shelf above the stove where she kept her jar of ground crayfish. It was on the highest shelf. She stretched. Her fingers just missed it. A hand reached past her, unhurried, effortless, and set the jar on the counter in front of her. She turned. He was standing closer than she had realized. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them moved. "I'm sorry," she said, "for last night. It wasn't my place." "I'm sorry." He said at exactly the same moment. They stared at each other. Something cracked open in the room. Not loudly. It was a specific sound of two people accidentally being human at the same time. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. "You first," he said. She exhaled. "I should not have raised my voice. What I said was out of..." "It wasn't." He looked at the jar in her hands. "What you said was correct. I have been avoiding coming back here. I did not know how to be in this arrangement. So I was not." A pause. Something rare in his voice. Honesty without armor. "I will come home earlier. I will keep better hours." He picked up his coffee. Pause again. "You may call me J1. I will not say it again." She looked at him. "J1," she said carefully, like testing ice. He nodded once and left the kitchen. She stood there holding her jar of crayfish and feeling like the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left. The weeks that followed were different. True to his word, he came home. And coming home meant they were in the same spaces. And being in the same spaces meant things happened between them that neither of them had accounted for in any contract. He noticed things about her. She could tell. He was a man who noticed everything and gave away nothing, but she had spent 5 years learning to read the things he did not say. He noticed that she took her tea without sugar. He noticed that she hummed Igbo lullabies under her breath when she cooked, and never seemed aware she was doing it. He noticed that she flinched slightly at loud, sudden sounds, and never once asked why, just quietly stopped slamming doors. One evening, she was sewing in the sitting room, fabric spread across the floor around her. He came home, saw the organized chaos, and instead of retreating to his office, sat on the couch 6 feet away with his laptop. He glanced at her work. "What are you making?" "Asook, for a friend's introduction ceremony." She threaded her needle. "I can move if it's in the way." "It's not." He watched her hands. "Show me." She looked up. He was watching with genuine curiosity, that total, focused attention of his, the kind that made you feel like the only thing in the room worth looking at. She showed him. She explained the weaving pattern, the way the thread had to breathe through the fabric, the patience it required. He asked 2 precise questions, and she found herself talking more freely than she'd intended, and then she laughed at something he said, dry and quiet, a comment about patience that was obviously about himself. When she finally looked up, the city outside was dark and 2 hours had disappeared. He looked almost surprised, like he had mislaid time and didn't know how to feel about it. "You should eat something," she said, already standing. "Adiz." She stopped. He was looking at her the way he had started looking at her sometimes. Not through her, not past her, at her, as if seeing something he kept needing to look at again. "Thank you," he said, "for this evening." She had received more elaborate compliments from strangers on the street. She felt like a hand pressed flat against her heart. "Of course," she said, and went to the kitchen before her face could say the rest. She found out on a Tuesday. She had gone to hospital not for treatment. Treatment was Thursday, but because she had left her favorite scarf there the week before. The orange and gold gelly her grandmother had sent from Enugu, and she had been quietly missing it for days. Dr. Han was coming out of consultation room. When she turned the corner, he looked at her, then at his clipboard, then at her again, with the expression of a man who had just made an error he could not undo. "Mrs. Kwan," he said carefully, "I assumed you were informed at last Thursday's session." "Informed of what, doctor?" She drove home with Dr. Han's words sitting in her chest like river stones. The cancer had progressed faster than the initial projections. The treatment was having limited effect. He had known for 3 weeks. He had sat beside her in that hospital for 3 weeks. Let her hold his arm on the way in. Let her bring him coffee. Let her believe the numbers were stable. And he had said nothing. She walked into the penthouse. He was at the dining table, working on his laptop. She set her bag down near the door. She stood at the end of the table and looked at him. He looked up. He saw her face. She watched something shift in his. The precise micro-expression of a man who has been found out and is calculating very quickly whether denial is still viable. She could tell from his eyes that he knew it was not. "How long?" she said quietly. "Did you plan to keep this from me?" He closed the laptop. He stood. "Adiz." "Do not," she said, and her voice was a dangerous kind of quiet. "Tell me you were protecting me. I am your wife. I attend every treatment. I rearrange my entire life around your schedule, your medication, making sure you eat and rest and take your pills at the right time. And you sat across from me every single day and looked me in the face and said nothing. When were you going to tell me? When it was too late to do anything? When there was nothing left to say?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it. She pressed her hands together. "I have given up my entire life for this arrangement, and I asked for nothing. I have never asked you for anything. But I am asking you now, do not lie to me. Not about this. I deserve better than this." He crossed the room. She stepped back. He stopped. "You're right," he said. She had not expected that. Not immediately. Not without argument. "You deserve to know," he said. "I was wrong to hide it. I am not accustomed to allowing people to carry things with me." He stopped. Something stripped down in his voice. "It is not an excuse. It is an explanation. I am sorry." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes bright. Then she walked to her room and closed the door. He did not follow. The silent treatment started that night. She was civil. She was not cold. She was not cruel. That was not her nature. She made his meals. She attended treatment without being asked. But she did not talk to him. Not really. Not the way they had been talking. The evening conversation stopped. The sitting in the same room stopped. She was present and she was utterly, completely closed. He noticed immediately. By day 2, he was distracted at his laptop. By day 4, Dae-sung reported to her, awkwardly, clearly under reluctant instruction, that Mr. Kwan had asked whether she seemed unwell. By day 6, Jae-won himself attempted conversation 3 separate times and received polite, minimal responses that gave him nothing to hold. He was losing his mind. She could tell. "Good," said a small, uncharitable part of her. It was day 8 when she came home. She had been out visiting a friend. The first time she had left the penthouse for anything except hospital runs since the marriage. She came through the door with her bag over one shoulder, unwinding her scarf, and she heard a crash, a chair scraping back, and then Jae-won's voice from the dining room, low and ragged. "Adiz, Adiz, something is wrong." She dropped her bag and ran. He was on the floor beside the dining table. One hand pressed his chest. The chair knocked over behind him. He was gasping. His face was tight with something she could not name. Her heart stopped completely. Just stopped. She dropped to her knees beside him and grabbed his arm. "Where does it hurt?" "Jae-won, look at me. I'm calling Dr. Han right now." She looked at him. He was looking up at her from the floor with dark eyes and no pain in them whatsoever. None. His breathing had already settled. The hand on his chest relaxed. She looked at his face. She looked at the chair. She looked at his face again. "Kwan Jae-won," she said very slowly. He had the grace to say nothing. "You faked it." A pause. I needed your attention. She stared at him. You threw yourself on the floor and pretended to collapse to get me to stop ignoring you. He was still holding her wrist. The silent treatment is a form of... She tried to pull away. His hand tightened. I'm sorry, he said. Just that. All the performance gone. All the strategy gone. His voice low and direct, and stripped down to something that stopped her from pulling away. I'm sorry for lying about the results. I'm sorry for shutting you out. I'm sorry for... He stopped. He looked at her face. At the tears she had not realized were there. Tears of relief and fury, and 8 days of swallowed hurt. I hate the distance between us, he said. I do not know when you became the person I want to come home to, but you are, and I cannot stand being in this house and having you look through me. She was still kneeling on the floor, beside him. He pulled her into his arms, right there on the cold hard floor of the dining room, pulled her in and held her, and she felt the solid warmth of him, the careful strength of his arms, the way he held on like he was afraid she would get up and leave. She pressed her face against his shoulder. If you ever lie to me about your health again, she said into his shirt, I won't. I mean it. I know. His arms tightened. I know you do. They stayed like that for a long time on the floor, neither of them willing to be the first to let go. Later, when the floor had become genuinely uncomfortable and they had moved to the couch, and the city had gone dark outside the windows, and the tea she had made was cold on the table, he looked at her in the dim light and said something she had not expected. I think I have been falling for you, he said, since before I understood what was happening. She looked at him. I don't know the exact moment, he said. I just know that somewhere between the hospital and this couch, the contract stopped being what this was. She was quiet for a moment. I have loved you, she said carefully, for 5 years. He went very still. Since almost the beginning, she continued. Since you were eating cold jollof rice alone at 2 a.m, I had left a cover for you, and I thought, who is taking care of you? I kept it to myself because I was a help, and you were you, and it wasn't something I was ever meant to say. She looked at her hands. But you asked for honesty. So... He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached over and took her face in both hands, carefully, like something he was terrified of breaking, and kissed her with everything that had been building since the hospital, since the car rides, since the evenings and the sewing and the floor and all of it. And that night, the contract stopped mattering entirely. She told him on a Sunday morning, showed him the test without preface, and watched his face do something she had never seen it do before. Open completely, like a window thrown wide in a room that had been closed for years. He stared at the small screen. He looked at her. Ours, she said. Ours, he confirmed. He pulled her in and held her, and said nothing for a long time. She felt in the silence everything he was carrying, the love, the terror, the gratitude, and at the edges of all of it, the quiet grief that never quite left him. I'm going to be here, he said, for as much of this as I can. I know, she said. I know you will. He was good to his word. He attended every appointment. He sat in waiting rooms that were clearly beneath his dignity. Laptop open, working, glancing up every time a door opened. He learned the names of every stage of the pregnancy in both Korean and Igbo, because she had taught him the Igbo ones, and he had asked her to repeat them until he said them correctly. He bought a thick medical text on fetal development. She found it in his office with certain pages bookmarked, and she did not tell him she had seen it, because the expression put on her face was not one she was ready to explain. He also became, in the same period, completely impossible about her safety. She could not reach high shelves without him appearing from nowhere to reach past her. She could not carry anything heavier than a small bag without it being taken from her hands. She made a mistake of mentioning once that she had been dizzy getting up too fast, and he immediately called Dr. Han, who spoke with her for 20 minutes about blood pressure, after which Jill Won instituted a rule that she was not to stand up quickly. I have been getting up from chairs for 26 years, she told him. You were not carrying my child for 26 years, he said, without looking up from his laptop. Dae-sung, who was witnessing this exchange from across the room, turned to face the wall so that no one would see him smile. October came. She noticed the coffee first. He had always finished his coffee, every morning 1 cup black, down to the last drop, One morning in October, she watched him set aside half-finished and say nothing. She said nothing either. She went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed very deliberately for several minutes. 3 weeks later, Dr. Han called them in together. She sat beside Jae-won in the consultation room and held his hand. And Dr. Han told him what she had half known since the morning of the unfinished coffee. The treatment was no longer holding. The progression had accelerated. Continued treatment could slow things, but not reverse them. He was looking at months. She did not cry in the room. She held Jae-won's hand, and she listened, and she did not cry. On the drive home, she looked out the window at Seoul going about its business, indifferent and bright, and thought, "We do not have enough time. We have never had enough time. And yet it still feels like being robbed." In November, he told her he was stopping the chemotherapy. She was 7 months pregnant. She was sitting at the kitchen island eating the cut mango she had been craving for weeks when he said it. She set the fork down and looked at him. "The side effects are taking more than the treatment is giving," he said. "I want the time I have left to be real time. Time where I am present, not surviving. I want to be here, actually here, for you, for her, for whatever time is left." The anger came first, then the grief, then cutting through both of them, painful and clear, understanding. "You should have told me before deciding," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Not after." "You're right." He crossed to her. He put his hands on either side of her face. "I'm sorry. He stopped. I keep trying to protect you from things you have every right to know. It is the only way I know how to love, and I am trying to unlearn it." She looked at him. Her eyes were burning. "Don't stop trying," she said. "I won't." Their daughter was born in December, in the early hours of a Wednesday morning, in a room full of specific chaos that Jae-won had clearly not fully prepared himself for despite all the books and all the appointments. He had been steady through 38 hours of labor, holding her hand, talking to her quietly, never once looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. When they placed the baby in his arms, something happened to his face. She watched it happen, and she knew she would carry the memory of it for the rest of her life. The specific moment Kwon Jae-won, who had built an empire out of walls, looked at his daughter for the first time and came completely undone. Not loudly, quietly, the way he did everything. His jaw tightened. His throat moved. And then he looked up at her with eyes that were bright and said in a voice that was not quite steady, "She's here. She's here," she said. They named her Ifeoma. It was a D's choice. He had not argued. He had only asked her what it meant. "It means good things," she told him. "It means it is good." He looked at the baby. "It is," he said. Jae-won spent 4 months knowing his daughter. For months of learning the particular weight of her, the small sounds she made before she cried, the way she tracked his face with her eyes, as if already deciding what kind of man he was. For months of sitting with her in the nursery in the low hours when the rest of Seoul was sleeping, just holding on. He started recording messages in January. Adiz found out from Dae-sung, who told her with the careful voice of a man carrying something too heavy for one person. She did not ask Jae-won about it. She understood. He was trying to build a presence for the years he would not be there, a voice for the milestones, a father for the days when the absence would be loudest. She found one file by accident in February. She opened it, his voice, clear and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "Ifeoma, by the time you hear this, you will be someone I cannot yet imagine. But I knew you for 4 months. And in those 4 months, you showed me something I had never understood before, that the bravest thing a person can do is love something fully, knowing it will cost them everything. Your mother knew that long before I did. She has always been braver than me. Listen to her. Learn from her. She chose you. She chose us when she had every reason not to." A pause. "I loved you from the first second. That does not stop. It just changes where it lives." She closed the laptop. She sat in his office in the dark for a very long time. Kwon Jae-won passed on a Thursday morning in late February at home, in their room, in the early light that came through the gap in the curtains, that particular gray-pink light she had come to love about Seoul mornings. She was beside him. She had not left his side in 3 days. He was not afraid. She knew this because she knew every expression his face made, every frequency of his silence. And what she saw in those last hours was not fear. It was something quieter and more complete. A man who had spent his life holding everything at distance, finally letting it be close. She held his hand. She told him she loved him. She had said it every day for 8 months, and she said it again now, so it would be the last thing. She told him Ifeoma would know him, every story, every detail, every truth of him. She would make sure their daughter understood exactly who her father was. She told him he had been seen. He had been seen from the very beginning, by the one person he had never thought to look at. Outside, Seoul kept moving. The city did not pause. It never did. Inside that room, the whole world was still. 6 years later, Adiz Kwan stood at the kitchen stove on a Sunday morning making jollof rice. The smell of it filled the whole apartment. Tomato and bay leaf and thyme, and a particular warmth that meant home, no matter what city she was standing in. Her grandmother's recipe, her mother's before that, outside the windows of the Seoul apartment. The sky was doing that pale, clean thing it did on good winter mornings. Small feet on the floor, behind her. Mama, what is that smell? Jollof. She looked over her shoulder. Ifeoma was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, hair going in 4 directions, her father's eyes watching her with her father's absolute attention. We make it on Sundays, the little girl said. Every Sunday. Without fail. Every Sunday without fail, Adiz confirmed. She smiled. No matter what happened during the week. Ifeoma padded in and climbed onto her stool beside the stove. She watched the pot with the same serious focus with which she watched everything. She was 6 years old and already so much like the man Adiz had loved that it knocked the breath out of her sometimes. Quietly, in the middle of ordinary moments. Tell me about father, she said. It was not a question. Adiz kept stirring. He was the most guarded man I have ever met, she said. He kept everything at a distance because he had learned that things you love can leave. But underneath all of that, he was the softest person in any room he walked into. He just needed someone patient enough to stay until he believed it was safe to show it. Ifeoma considered this with her father's seriousness. Were you patient? I tried to be. Did he know you loved him? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul hummed along, indifferent and bright and endlessly alive. In the end, she said, yes, he knew. Her daughter leaned against her arm, small, warm, entirely real. I have his eyes, she said. You have his eyes, Adiz confirmed. And your smile, and my smile. Ifeoma thought about this with the gravity of a 6-year-old solving something important. Then we both have him, she concluded. He's in both of us. Adiz set down the spoon. She pulled her daughter into her arms and held her tighter than the moment required. Her face pressed into her hair, breathing her in. Some love stories do not end. They change shape. They live in the eyes of a little girl standing on a stool on a Sunday morning, watching her mother cook the meal that means home. They live in the space between what was lost and what remains. They live